Hi, I'm going to give you a short video now about how to do the fall pre-assessment. Explain each activity very briefly and give you an overview of what I'm expecting you to do. If you go to the Google Classroom site for your period, it usually defaults to the stream. You want to switch to classwork and then go down to the initial pre-assessment for fall. Open that assignment and then open the Google document and you'll be at the fall pre-assessment. It looks like this at the top, 2018 8th grade English. You'll scroll down to the first page is a survey. I've talked about that. If you would just highlight your number and bold it, then I know your answer. And then at the bottom, a couple of short answer questions. The next page, we've read the Where I'm From poem, and I've asked you to use the template to write your own. Taking the instruction from the parenthetical statement there, erase that instruction, put your answer here, put your material here, and erase the underline. So we've got a clean I'm from, and then your words without all this lines and parentheses. At the bottom, we described free verse poetry a little bit. Then we talked about the poetic elements. We have those there. You'll notice what I didn't tell you yet. After knowing the elements, I want you to go back to your Where I'm From poem and identify any of those elements that you see in your own poem. If you don't have any of these elements at all, I want you to go rewrite part of your poem to include some of that. Okay? Next, we did the autobiography in 5 chapters. Here are all the poetic elements. If you find one of those elements in the poem, please note it by using the words or phrases that match that particular element. Just write them here, same spot. If one doesn't show up, onomatopoeia doesn't show up, erase it. Okay? Keep going. Next, we have narrative writing, which is short story writing. I have a short explanation about what stories need to do. All stories have characters in them who do something. There's some sort of conflict being solved, and then we're looking forward to the resolution of that conflict. I've left you, given you a plot trajectory chart that should be sort of familiar to you. And then I've given you the instruction of writing a 55-word story. This is a challenge to accomplish all of these plot tasks in 55 words. Later in the document, there are some 55-word story samples. You can go look at those now if you want to. But write a 55-word story. And I gave you 2 ideas. Yesterday, I got locked in the school library when everybody left for the night. And I'm tired of covering his foot, the glossy red shoe said. These two can one of these two can either show up in the story just this way, or it can be the point or the emphasis of the story. So you don't have to use these sentences, but this idea should show up. Okay, 55 words only. Then we have a little short expository essay discussion, what an expository essay does, what a thesis statement is, and how a main point and a claim and argument are the same thing, and an explanation of how important it is that when we write expository essays, we need to have something to say. That usually means we've done some reading, among other things. So there's some main point practice, because expository essays are about getting the main point. So there's a paragraph about a topic, and I've asked you to restate the main point of this paragraph, which is going to be in your own words. Okay? There's not a sentence to borrow and lift here. You come up with your own main point and a title. There's several of those, practicing of main points. Then we move on to an article, the one we may or may not have read at home or together, about learning from family stories. So if you haven't yet, read that article. And at the end of the article, there's a short opportunity for you to write the main point of that article in one sentence. Main points are usually in one sentence. Okay. Then there's some summarizing work. So we'll go back to the same article about family stories and do a summary. On the left side of the chart is the instructions for what you're doing in each of the right side boxes. So we started with, what's the topic in a couple of words? What's the topic of this story? It's not the main point, it's just simply the topic. And then what's the author saying about that topic? And then you're getting to the main point summary. And then I've asked you to bullet point a few key details that of course support that main point. So in that, you'd end up with 3 or 4 sentences of the main point and the key supports for that point, and you've got a summary of your article, okay? And then I asked you to write it all right there. The document didn't transfer over cleanly from Word to documents, that's why this had been 1 page, that's why it's not showing up rightly. Persuasive writing is that writing in which we take a position on something and then trying to get other people to think or do like we are thinking or doing. So I first asked you, can you think of a persuasive argument that would follow from your family stories article? And you may or may not. It's a brainstorm. That's it right here. Can you think of one? What is it? Here's an exercise that I'd like you to not do. I don't think we'll go through that together, I hope, at some point, so skip that. Now here's an issue. If Steilacoom School District says it's going to get iPads or tablets for every student from kindergarten through 12th grade to use at school and at home, so that parents won't be bothered by their students doing schoolwork, asking them for help and so on, could you make a persuasive point about that? And if you think back to our family stories, there's some things you might be able to argue about that. I'm not asking you to agree with it necessarily, but what could you say based on having read the Family Stories article and the idea of bothering your parents with your work? So write that right here, and then what would that be, that persuasive point? Then we're moving on to poetry, part 2. We've done one of these. Here's another one. A poem rearranged or misarranged. Your job is to take those 16 lines and rearrange them. It says with a neighbor, but just do it on your own. Here are the guidelines for what the poem ought to look like. You can take those 16 sentences, follow these guidelines, and come up with a poem. So do that. Try that on your own. You can simply renumber them here if you'd like. You don't have to write them out. Rewrite them. And then I want you to write a quatrain, and you should know by now what that is. If you don't, figure it out. Write a quatrain with an ABCB rhyme scheme using the words roses, school, and blue somewhere. Okay, just write that right there. Back to narrative. I want to emphasize that every narrative story has a setting, and there's a time and a place and a situation in which that story is set. So it's not just Thursday at 6:30, but it's the circumstance, locked in the school after school. It's not just London at whatever year Harry Potter is set, but it's also the magical, mystical world that he enters into, the circumstance. So here's a couple of examples of 55-word stories. I'm not going to read them to you. You can read them, and you'll notice if they follow that plot trajectory. And often they have their conclusion and much of the plot, especially the climax and then the resolution, happen all at once. And sometimes even the conflict isn't revealed until the very end. Let's read one, actually. So in the garden, standing there in the garden, she saw him running toward her. "Tina, my flower, the love of my life," he'd said at last. "Oh, Tom, Tina, my flower. Oh, Tom, I love you too." Tom reached her, knelt down, and quickly pushed her aside. "My flower, you're standing on my prize-winning rose." So the reveal of what the real story was is until the very end, and the climax and the resolution, the conflict are all really done in the space of a few words. That's one of the difficulties, 55-word story. You have to do it very quickly. Okay, so that is what I want you to make sure you saw. Also, that every story has characters, as I've said, and usually dialogue. So when you're writing a narrative story, use dialogue to advance your story. Don't summarize what people are doing. Show us what they're doing by their discussion. Okay. Then I asked you, write another 55-word story based on this picture, and I won't say a word about it. So it's not a describe what happened or what you're seeing, it's make up a story. Something's about to happen, or something just happened, or someone's raising some problem that your story will address. Okay? So write a story based on that picture. Just write it right there. Then we have back to expository again. We have another article about, in this case, about handwriting, why it's important for you. You can read that, and the purpose being that you're going to, again, identify the main point, and then again, write a short summary of that article. We're practicing main points and summarizing. We can't do that enough, so they've got the spots right there to do that. Here's an easy expository essay structure: main point, key idea, supports for the key idea number 2, supports for the key idea number 2, and so on. What I'd like you to do is go back to the handwriting article and plug in the appropriate material here. So whatever the main point of the handwriting article was, the first key idea supported that, and then the evidence that supported the key idea, that all supports the main point. Go ahead, in 3 or 4 words or bullet point kind of notes, take that, write that there. There's space for 3 key ideas and support. Maybe you only need 2, it's up, whatever you think works. Okay. Again, back to persuasive. You notice we're going back and forth among all the types. I want you to brainstorm several things that you think people ought to do about school in particular, I guess. Now that you know about family storytelling and about handwriting, write a couple of persuasive claims you could make, and then name the audience of that claim. So if you're writing to the school board, it's one thing different than if you're writing to your parents versus writing to each other, and so on. Okay, so we'll talk more about this, I hope, but try to think of a persuasive claim you could make now that you know what you know about handwriting and storytelling. Back to poetry. You'll need to read this. There's 3 poetic forms: a haiku that has these elements in it. I'm not going to go through them. I'll let you read those. And if you don't understand them, we'll probably talk about them by the time you get there. A diamante is a structure, a poetic structure that has 16 words. You need to understand it's 2 nouns that are opposites, sun and moon. And the sun and the moon are at the opposite ends, and then the first half of the poem is connected to the sun issues, and the second half is connected to the moon. So again, we'll probably talk about that. And then acrostic poem is that when we do the letters down the side make up a word, and so I've asked you to write a poem each type, with potentially thinking about these topics, but you whatever topics you like. School, writing, your favorite place, something you hope to do someday, something like that. Okay. Again, back to narrative writing, another 55-word story, and using these actual newspaper headlines as the motive for the story. These words don't have to show up. This could be the title of your story. It could be something. It could be something that is covered in the story. These actual words could show up in the story. That's fine. Okay. They're kind of silly because the wording is funny, like federal agents raid gun shop, find weapons. So the point being, of course they'd find weapons in a gun shop. That's what the shop sells. So there's several here you can choose from. Back in another expository article to read about how screen time is bad for your brain, what it does to your neurology. So if we read that there, do the same thing. We're going to move on to persuasive. So prepare a persuasive essay with the 3 articles: screen time, handwriting, and storytelling. And I have an organizer, which, sorry, it's turned the wrong way. Your position is here. That's the first thing to write. And then second thing is the key ideas you want to use to support that. Bullet points is fine. Details, bullet point details to support that, each of the key ideas. And then a 1-sentence acknowledgement of the other side, the other position that you're going to be dealing with as well. It's not a paper, it's basically an outline of a paper. And yes, with all these things, I'm asking you to do this without me telling you a lot about it. I want to see how you stand on these things now. And so I know this might be complicated and more than you want to do or feel ready to do, but I want to see how you're doing. It's fine with me if you're not prepared to do as well as you want. I get it. We have time to work on that. 4th article is about gratitude, how it's good for you, good for your brain. Being grateful is good for your health. Again, main point and a summary. And then we're a little writing exercise called Build a Paragraph. This one has 6 sentences that are to be a paragraph. I simply want you to put them in order. So figure out which is the topic sentence and then which sentences follow next. There is an order, there's a couple variations that could work, but there are some things that will need to be in particular places. When we go through this, I'll talk about this with you, okay? But those first 6. Then there are another 12 sentences, which I first want you to number 1 to 12. And I'm going to tell you that there's overlap in ways that make it that many different options could be taken here. Many people could arrange these in many different ways, okay? But once you do that, arrange it however you want. Then I want you to, down here, rewrite that by combining and shortening sentences and cutting out words, using conjunctions, putting material together. And it usually is about 4 or 5 sentences out of the 12, and you could write a smoother paragraph in this blank space here. Then we've got an expository, organizer, apparently further down. I want you to use one of these two to outline an expository essay about all the material we've covered, you've read. Gratitude in the brain, digital screens in the brain, handwriting in the brain, family stories, some sort of point you want to make, skip the introduction, some sort of thesis you want to make that out of all those things, and then the topic sentence of each body paragraph, key ideas supporting that topic sentence, all of which support the thesis statement. We'll talk about conclusions later. So I believe that's going to be the end. I want you to use either one of these two. You don't have to do both, either one of these two organizers, and that would be the end of our packet. I know I went quickly because I am wanting to see how you're doing with these things. If you haven't done this before and you're not very good at it, that's great. I want to know that. I want you to know that for yourself and identify what we're going to work on together throughout the year. If you're great with all these things, then we're going on to the next level of material and next level of activity. So don't worry about this being for a grade. If I did this badly, I'm gonna get a bad grade. That's not the case. This is for both of us for all of us to find out how we're doing on these kinds of things, okay? We'll cover this together more. If you have any questions, obviously talk to me, please. Thank you.